Let's try.
There you go.
Okay,
All right, good. Thank you, Randy.
super.
All right. I'm going to start with the title of this presentation, Keep It Simple. We beekeepers.
Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
We're seeing a screen that says this meeting is being recorded with an option that says leave meeting or got it.
I don't see that. I see
No?
Keep It Simple.
Click
Yeah,
on
so
it.
I got
Click,
that.
click got it.
Yeah, click got
Oh,
it.
that's on my screen. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's all right. Thank you. If you see anything weird pop up, let me know.
You have to consent to be recorded. That's what that screen is on everybody's screen. So you hit consent.
Thank you.
All right, so keep it simple. I thought beekeeping is simple. I thought I'm gonna go buy me 3 pounds of bees, throw them in a box, and once or twice a year, I would open a faucet and fill up a jar of honey. Well, it turned out to be a lot more complicated than that. A little bit about me, I just took this picture a couple minutes ago, so I'm wearing the same shirt. I'm the president of Summit County Beekeepers Association. My name is Robert Najjar. I'm also an electrical engineer, and I own a company in Richfield. DIS, Digital Integrated Systems, is a technology company. I've been married for 32 years to the same queen and have 4 beautiful girls. Very passionate about beekeeping, always eager to learn, and it seems like the more I learn, the more I realize that I don't know much. And that's why I enrolled in the University of Florida, the Master Beekeeping program. I'm in the advanced level, hoping to graduate and become a Master Beekeeper in March of next year. So at the end of this presentation, you're gonna learn, you should have all the information to learn the key steps that are needed to take your colony through winter, through the harsh winters of Northeast Ohio. I should emphasize that. We've been lucky the past couple of years where winter wasn't harsh, but there are times where it dips below 15 degrees, minus 15, and you're wondering, are my bees alive? What, I hope you wish at that moment you've done all the right things to take your colonies through the harsh winter. For us to analyze, why, how to, in order for us to determine how we're going to keep our colonies alive, we need to figure out what kills them. And so this is, I would say, the top 4 reasons why bees and colonies collapse during the winter cold seasons. You got diseases and critters. You have the bees, maybe you don't leave them enough store of honey and they starve to death. There's humidity issue. They're like us, you could go running outside when naked, when it's, I haven't tried it, by the way. But, and you won't get sick, you will get cold. But then if you pour water on your clothes and walk outside, you could have hypothermia. So humidity is a major issue in the colonies or in your hives. And the other thing is low number of bees. The bees heat the cluster. And if you don't have enough bees to keep the queen and to keep the cluster warm, your colony could collapse or will collapse. Diseases and viruses are really the main reason why our colonies collapse. Often people are wondering, hey, I treated and I fed and I wrapped my hive and I don't know what happened. I thought I had large number of bees, or maybe I felt that I have, basketballs or a good sized cluster inside the colony, and I have no idea what happened. They were flying in and out, and bam, winter comes, spring comes, and the colony is dead. I don't want to go through, this is not a presentation about diseases, but if they die from diseases, and that's the #1 killer, what causes these diseases? They're not airborne, they're transmitted via touch. And so the #1 common cause of these infections is the Varroa destructor, hence the name. They literally destroy the colony. So imagine if you were to relatively compare a Varroa mite on a bee to your body. It's like having a Frisbee or having a mite the size of a Frisbee feeding on your liver or on your internal organs or your fat. And when it's done with that area, it moves to another section and starts feeding again. So if mites are a major problem, then how do we control them? There are a lot of places and a lot of people that advocate, hey, get a schedule, stick to it, and you're gonna be fine. Guaranteed you will have 100% survival. Well, the problem with that is every year we have various obstacles and conditions presented to us as beekeepers. And so if you remember early in the spring, if you follow any Facebook channels, a lot of people were saying, well, I tested my mites, I have 0 mites in my colony or colonies, and I did the same thing and I had no mites. And so if you were sticking to a schedule, the schedule says, hey, on such and such date, you're going to treat with Formic Pro. Such and such date, you're going to treat with another miticide. And what I tell you is you need to know your mite count before you treat. Because if you have less than 1% mite load in your colony, why in the world would you subject them to the fumes of the Formic Pro or Maxtrix or other harsh chemicals? Yeah, they're natural chemicals, but they're still chemicals. So know your mite count. And a lot of people have a problem with the alcohol wash. And they don't want to kill 300 bees. I've struggled with that for 3 years. I wouldn't do it. I still struggle with it. And when I need to do it, I call Randy. Hey, Randy, come inspect my colonies. So he's the murderer that kills my bees and not me. And it's like a mental thing that hey, those are my pets. And so you want to protect them and save them. It doesn't make sense to pull 300 bees and soak them in alcohol. Some of you may say, I will never treat with alcohol. I would do the sugar roll, and that's okay. At least do something that will indicate the level of infection of mites in your colony. A sugar roll is not going to give you an accurate count, but I'm also going to tell you that the alcohol wash does not give you an accurate count. It all depends on what you're testing and where you're testing. If you pull a frame of cap brood and you do a mite wash on it, you're going to get less numbers than if you do the same exact test on a frame that has larva that's about to be capped. See, this larva is about to be capped and it's emitting a pheromone inside the colony. The mites smell that and they cling to the nurse bees and they go to that area so that the nurse bees are tending to this larva right before they cap it, and the mites will slip into the cell and they will hide under it until it's capped, and then they go to town. The female mite is going to lay several eggs, and they're all going to hatch and they're going to feed on that poor larva that can't even defend itself. So again, your level and the accuracy of the test, you will never get 100% unless you kill the entire colony and count the bees and count the mites. That's your one way to find out. But you want to test a frame that's about to be capped, because that's going to tell you, is it a bad infection? It's not going to tell you 100%, oh, you get 10% infestation or 2% infestation. You don't know that, because you can perform the same test in the super and you won't get any mites. So be careful what you're testing and be consistent. So if you're testing the same colony 2, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times during the season, always test with open uncapped brood, and be consistent. Don't compare that test to one test that has all capped brood. Don't assume low count just because you tested in early September, and now it's early October, and you say, hey, I did my test, it was the first week of September, And guess what? I pulled my max strips, or I pulled my Formic Pro 2 weeks later, and everything is handy dandy. I got no mites. Do your test. You don't know. I can tell you, and I'll show you in a slide here what happened to one of my colonies in Bath. And if you are one of those beekeepers that want to go natural, they don't want to treat. They just want to keep bees that can naturally combat and kill mites and survive the winter. I'm going to tell you right now that most likely you will end up with a dead colony in April. There are various ways you can treat your colonies. If you want to debate that, it's not for this presentation, but you know, you take your dog to the vet and you give him the shots that he or she needs, and you know, you take care of them. You give them medication if they need it, and you need to do the same thing for your colonies. Various methods. I'm not going to go through them again. The idea here is that you must read the label and don't treat with the same miticide over and over and over, because the varroa mites that survive the treatment develop natural resistance to that treatment. And next time you treat, you're only killing less and less mites as you go. So here's this is a picture of a portion of my bottom board after I treated with Formic Pro. This colony I treated in mid-February. I think the temperature was in the upper 40s. Bees are flying in and out. So I went in there and I puffed them with oxalic acid. Didn't get a chance to do it 3 times like you're supposed to, but it was a time where, you know I have very little brood. So if I killed all the mites outside of the capped cells, I'm okay. In late April, I used max strips. In June, late June, I did 3 treatments of oxalic acid. So those treatments are every Saturday morning. Then in late July, I treated with Formic Pro. And so, you know what? I was thinking, I'm done with these bees. It's late July. I pulled the strips in mid-August. I'm going to be fine. Well, I did a test and I had 2-3% mite load. So I decided to puff them 2 weeks in a row with oxalic acid. Well, early September, I did a test, alcohol wash, and I ended up with 32 mites out of 300 mites. Now that's 10%. That's outrageous. Like, okay, maybe I did something wrong. Let me test another colony. I got 9%. Another colony, I got 8%. So I knew the 9 colonies in that apiary need to be treated. I didn't continue the test. There was no reason to kill more bees. And a week later, I went back, and this is the board that I have. I don't know how closely you can see it, but all these red, dark, glossy objects here are mites, thousands of them. So it's scary, but I'm glad I caught it, right? If I didn't catch it and I assumed, hey, I treated in July, I'm fine. And I used an expensive treatment, Formic Pro, so I'm good. These bees would have been double in just 21 days, and another double or more. They grow exponentially, 48, 50 days later. And this is not a reflection of all the mites in the colony, because some mites are still in the capped brood. And as these bees hatch, they already died. These mites will be cleaned out, and I will have more drops, more mite drop to the bottom board after they hatch. So just to give you an idea about the level of infestation in that colony, there's 28 mites in this little circle. So it's really scary. And this is why it's really important to know your numbers. You can't assume anything. Same thing happened in the same apiary last year. And what I think the problem is not that I'm not treating, but the problem is that there's some beekeeper who wants to go the natural way and not treat their colonies. Their colonies are weak and infested with mites and diseases. And what happens to weak colonies? They get robbed. And my bees brought them home and they started to multiply. So be considerate of other beekeepers, and be a beekeeper is what I always say, not a bee haver. You really need to take care of your colonies, and that's the least you can do, is treat them for mites. Other ways the colonies will collapse, and sorry, I spent a lot of time on the mite and mite control and knowing your numbers, but that's the #1 killer in your colony. You got to worry about mice. Mice are now looking for a warm place to nest. And it's not that mites will kill your bees, but what happens is if they go in there and they nest and they start feeding on the frames when the cluster is really tight, when it's 10 degrees outside, the bees break the cluster to go investigate what's going on in their colony, and the cluster breaks and the bees chill and they die. So install your mice guards right now. This is one, I think I bought 10. They were like a couple dollars a piece. So they're not very expensive. And they're very, very easy to install. You can put a push pin on each side, or you can drill. I don't like to drill because in the winter, if there's a warm day, I'd like to remove the push pin from here, flip this open, flip it open 90 degrees, go inside and clean the dead bees from the bottom. And you will have dead bees, don't panic. Those bees that are dead are probably not winter bees. Almost every bee you see in your colony now is gonna die comes Christmas time. So don't panic if you see a lot of bees in there. Don't open the colony. Don't say, hey, I want to see what's going on in there. Leave them alone, and I'll cover that in more details. Raccoons and skunks also, they like to nibble on bees, but they don't cause the cluster to die in the winter. But when they scratch on that hive trying to get the bees to come out and eat them, they may grab a few, but again, the cluster breaks. Bears, if there are bear sightings in your area, the only way to protect them is to put electric fence or some kind of a high fence. I think the electric fence is the only way. Beetles are a major problem. Once the infestation starts, it's really hard to control. So always watch for them and put traps early on in the season. What I do to mitigate this problem is I buy, I think it's a pound of kosher salt, and I spray it under the hives, because the larva of the beetles goes in the ground and burrow and wait until it's mature, and then it comes out and goes into the colonies. So that will kill them in the ground before they get a chance to infest your colonies. Another reason why your colony will collapse is lack of food. They starve to death, and I think you hear that a lot. There's mild winters sometimes cause the bees to consume. They're not clustering tight, they're feeding more, so they consume more honey. And when you thought that 60 pounds is enough or was enough to take them through winter, they fed through it and they're done with it in January or December. And now they're in trouble because you're not going to have anything blossoming and blooming until end of March. So leave them as much honey as you can. Now is your time to feed in October. When the temperatures dip below 50 degrees during the day and probably in the upper 30s at night, your bees will not be feeding on syrup. At that point, you're done. You might as well remove the liquid from your colonies so that you don't add more humidity inside. So right now is your chance. Inspect your colony, make sure they have enough stores. If they don't, feed the heck out of them, and you want to feed them 2-to-1 sugar. And I'll cover this a little later here. Sometimes it's not always the beekeeper's fault. The weather is an issue. Nectar flow. We were told in books and presentations and by very famous people that, hey, if it rains in July, you're not gonna know what to do with the amount of honey you're gonna collect from your colonies in the fall from the goldenrod. Well, we got a lot of rain in July, and let me tell you something. I can't even pull one single frame out of 25 colonies. I probably can, but that will hurt the bees, and I don't want to feed sugar water unless I have to. So humidity is another thing. Hypothermia is real when it comes to bees. There's condensation, heat rises, it hits the top of the hive, it condenses, the weather warms up a little bit and starts drooping on the bees and they die. So you have to find ways to mitigate the humidity inside your hive. Ventilation is critical. Your inner cover should be in this position. Some people flip this upside down and the hole is up on top. You want to keep it down. You want to give your bees a chance to use it as a upper entrance, because they have to sometimes go out and do their business, and the bottom entrance is blocked maybe with snow and maybe dead bees. So make sure you have an upper entrance. It would act as a chimney, and it will also act as an upper entrance for your bees, or exit and entry. So ventilation is critical. Don't ever wrap your hive and close this. That would be really bad. So a lot of people say, hey, I don't care how big my hive is, my colony is going to keep itself warm because they only feed the cluster. They don't feed the entire box, they're only feeding the cluster, and that's true. But there's heat exchange. And so that cluster, as it warms up, it starts warming the surrounding area. And if you have a super that is empty, please remove it. Your bees don't need to heat more room or more space in there and have a larger heat exchange between the cluster and the air surrounding them. So make sure you only have enough, just enough space for them to winterize. The way my colonies go into winter is either is 2 deeps. By the end of October, the full deep is totally capped honey or sugar water if I need to feed them. And the bottom board has honey and pollen, and that's where the cluster is. You will see, if you're a first-year beekeeper and you're inspecting on a warm day or a warm weekend in October, you will see that not many bees should be on the top. When you open that inner cover, there should not be a lot of bees in there, because that should be all capped honey. And what the bees do, if there is any brood in there, they will push the queen down, because as the bees hatch, they will start filling those cells with nectar and start capping them. So remove any empty supers and any excess space that you may have in there. So what should we do? I covered a lot of it, but I'm going to organize it for you here. Make sure your mites are under control. Treat with Formic Pro. Now, if you haven't treated with Formic Pro in the past 6 weeks, go do your mite test, and it doesn't have to be Formic Pro. There is no affiliation here, but treat it with any kind of harsh chemical to drop your mites under the cap. So whatever you treat with, make sure it penetrates the capping and it gets to the pupae that's in those cells. I treat my colonies 3 times with Formic Pro, whether it's Mite away strips, quick strips, or Formic Pro. I do it 3 times. I don't stick to a calendar. Excuse me. I don't stick to a calendar. I stick to my mite count. When the mite count is high enough, that tells me it's time to treat them. Make sure you have enough stores. So make sure you have enough food for your colonies. Imagine this. I have a picture later on. I'll share it with you. But if you have 2 deep, I'll call them supers or brood chambers, 2 deep boxes, 10 frames each, you should have 14 frames of capped honey to make sure your bees don't starve during the winter. It doesn't mean they're going to use every one of those frames. And the way you want it is you want 10 frames of capped brood up in the top chamber. And then on the bottom box, you want on the outside. So number 1 and 2 and number 9 and 10 should be capped brood. Why? I'm sorry, capped honey. And the reason you want that is the honey acts as insulation for the cluster that's sitting on frame 3 to 8. You could have more than that. They'll figure out when to stop filling up the bottom chamber. But you should have 14 frames in 10 frame hive. You should have 12, same theory. You have 8 kept frames on top and 2 on each side in the bottom. I have my best success of winterizing my colonies is in 5 frame newts. I tested it last year and I had 5 out of 5 survive. And the way I had them was double deeps, 5 frames on top, 5 on the bottom. I fed them until they didn't take it anymore. And then I winterized them and they had plenty of food. And I was amazed that they survived. Because, you know, the numbers in a nuke are way, way less than a 10 frame colony. Use candy boards. This is more like a sugar mound, where this picture is from Roseanne. Thanks for sharing, Roseanne. If you notice, there is a screen here the bees can go through. There's a newspaper that she puts on the bottom, and then she pours a bag of sugar or 2 bags of sugar. And what this is really an insurance policy for your bees. When they run out of food, the bees are going to move up. You may have frames of honey in number 1 and 2 and 9 and 10 in the upper chamber, and the bees will never find them because it's cold and they're climbing up 1 millimeter a day. And then when they run out of food and they keep going up, they're going to hit the sugar. And if you see here, they consumed quite a bit of it. And that's what you want. And this is like, I tell you what, it's the best scene ever when you open the hive in maybe March and just to check on your sugar mound or candy board, make sure they have enough food, and you see this and you know your bees made it. How do you feed your bees now in October? And you want to do 2-to-1 ratio, 2 sugar, 1 water. It could be by volume or weight. So you could have 2 pounds of sugar to 1 pound of water if you want to weigh your water, or you can do the way I do it is by volume. So I grab a quart mason jar, I fill it twice with sugar, dump it in a pan, and I fill it once with water, dump it in there and warm up the water. I don't bring it to a boil. I just make sure it's warm enough for the sugar to dissolve. And then I let it cool down and I feed it to my bees. That was the case last year and the year before. This year I have a lot more colonies, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I know what my wife is going to do. She's probably going to kill me because I'm going to have sugar and syrup all over the place. I already covered this. Bees will consume more honey during a mild winter, so you need to be aware of it. Once you winterize your colony, really the only thing you can do is open the top cover on a warm day and give them more sugar if they run out. Something like this in February, I would not give them any more sugar. But something like this in January, I would panic and I would definitely add more sugar in there. I'm pointing at the other screen, but you know, there's enough sugar in this colony, so I wouldn't add sugar in February, for example. But I would check every time the temperature shoots over 50 degrees, that would be something I would check on. Randy, I'm not looking at the chat. If I need to stop and answer some questions, please let me know.
Yeah, very good. We're watching.
All right. All right. Make sure you have good ventilation. We talked about the upper entrance, lower entrance. you know, some people will put this and then they will block some of these holes and they just keep a few inches, couple inches open. I keep it the way it is. I want air to go in there, but my hives are all pointing south. And I do have a windbreak in front of them, so I'm not worried about the wind blowing into the colony. If the wind is blowing in the direction of your entrance, so if they're pointing east or is it west and north, then you got to do something about it and maybe reduce the entrance and make sure you have some kind of windbreak. So keep it sanitized. You know, the worst thing is when a mouse gets into a colony, a healthy colony, they build their nest, they have their babies, and now you have 3 or 4 mice defecating and urinating into the colony, and you open the hive and it stinks, especially after the colony has collapsed. So a very cheap solution, $2, $3 can save you $175 worth of bees in the spring. Insulate your hive. So if there's one thing you're going to walk away from here, walk away with this. The heat rises. The area that your hive will lose the most heat is the top. So put some kind of insulation between your inner cover and your outer cover. And if you don't want to do that, at least cut a piece of 2-inch insulation and let it cover the entire, on the outside of the telescopic cover. Have that insulation in there. It helps your bees probably by saving 70–80% of the heat losses into your colony, and it reduces condensation. So please, please, please insulate the top of your colony. And for the very least, if you don't want to insulate the entire hive, wrap it with tar paper. Wrapping it with tar paper will act as a wind block. Tar paper is dark. So even when it's 30 degrees and it's sun shining, it absorbs the heat, the rays from the sun, and it warms up the outside of the hive. You hear a lot, oh, if you have weak colonies, combine them. And I'm going to caution you here. I don't believe in that. A colony is weak at this point for a reason. They're either infested with mites or they're infested with diseases. So you take a weak colony and you add it to a very strong colony, thinking, okay, well, these bees are going to help the cluster, or they're going to help take the bees through the winter. And the next thing you know, your colony collapses. So there are 3 possibilities when you combine 2 colonies. They're either both healthy, and the only way they could be healthy is if you have maybe mated queens late in the season, you created a nuke, and maybe you have 4 or 5 frames of bees, and it's not enough to take them through winter. That's a healthy colony. It's just the time that the queen started laying was late in the season. So if you have 2 colonies like that, yeah, give one of the queens away to somebody who needs them and combine them. That's okay. But if you have a 10-frame colony that's doing amazing, and you have another 10-frame colony next to it, and you have no idea what's going on, but the numbers are dwindling down, there's barely any brood, scattered brood everywhere, no good pattern. They're not collecting honey while the other colony is bringing so much honey and so much nectar. There's a problem there. Leave that, let that colony be. If you can save it on its own. Do not combine it with a healthy colony. If you need to, okay, the third possibility is that they're both sick, and combining them won't do you any good. So both of them are healthy, both of them are sick, or one is sick and one is healthy. The only time you want to combine if they're both healthy, but they have low numbers because they don't have large number of bees, that's okay to combine. So be careful. You can improve their chances by combining them. But I'm here to also tell you that you can use a double screen board. This is about $25. So let's say you have 10 colony that's doing okay, and you have another 10 frame colony that's doing fantastic, and another 10 frame colony that's weak. for whatever reason, and you know they're healthy, you put this on top of the first box, the first colony, and then you put the second colony on top, and the heat from the bottom will go through the screen here and will help the top colony stay warm. They will have different entrances. So if the entrance to the bottom colony is on this side, you know, open this up and let this side be the entrance for the upper colony. The bees never match, never mix. There's no drifting because one is pointing this way, the other one is pointing 90 degrees or 180 degrees, depending on what double screen you buy. A very effective tool to take a weak colony through winter by you know, utilizing the heat that elevates from the bottom colony. Feeding, I was still feeding regular pollen patties. I think I will stop now as the weather starts to cool down. But the reason I wanted to feed them pollen is there was, you know, August was a tough month for the bees, and I didn't want the queen to stop producing. They all had honey in them, and I knew they have enough carbohydrate. They just needed pollen, so I gave them pollen patties. And my colonies are laying, like there are frames and frames of capped brood. Good and bad, you don't want super large colonies, so you control how much pollen you give them. You don't want a massive colony that you can't have. You need 4 supers to keep them alive through the winter because they're going to consume it all. So just be careful when to feed. At this point, I would not feed pollen patties anymore, but in the winter, February and March, your bees are still alive. The only thing they have left is that mound of sugar that they're nibbling on. Give them winter patties. Winter patties are very rich in protein or in carbohydrate, not enough protein, so it doesn't induce the queen to start laying because she thinks there's a nectar flow. My configuration, the way I do it, is this is my bottom board, and my bottom board is below this, and this is my mouse guard, and then this is my deep. The brood is in the middle of the cluster. My goal is to have 2 frames of honey, capped honey on the right-hand side, 2 frames on the left-hand side. And then I want to have a full super of honey, whether it's deep or medium on top, preferably deep. And I want it to be filled. And right now, if you don't have that, now is the time to start feeding and make sure they cap this. If they don't cap it, right before you winterize it and wrap it, you want to take all the capped frames and put them in the middle and put the empty frames on the outside, because again, the cluster is going to move up 1 millimeter a day. And so sometimes we find them starving right here. And there are 2 frames, 3 frames of honey over here and 1 over here. And the cluster was so cold and so tight, and they couldn't get to, they don't move left and right. And so they die from starvation, and food is only, you know, a few centimeters away, a few inches away. So you reorganize this hive, make sure all your capped honey is above the cluster. And then you put your candy board. If you come to the meeting next week, we're going to make a candy board. We're going to make one from scratch. Randy has one from last year that the bees didn't touch, which tells me he did a good job leaving enough honey for them. And then we'll show you what it looks like when it's all said and done. This is a feeder that I use. There's a gap here that allows the bees to go through. And that's the feeder that I use. There are 2 compartments with floaters, with racks. And I put a quart of honey, or I'm sorry, a quart of syrup on both sides before I put the candy board, of course. And this is how I feed. Now, when I'm done feeding, I dump whatever syrup is left outside. I dry it with a towel. And then I fill the 2 compartments with wood shavings. And then we'll demonstrate this next week if you come to the meeting. And so now you have a candy board. You know, if you take a bag of sugar and put it next to your stove, and you boil some water and you leave it there open for a couple of days, you come back and it's like a rock. Why? Because it absorbed all that humidity and then it solidified and became a rock of sugar. The candy board is already like a rock, and it's absorbing all that vapor and humidity that's elevating from the cluster, and it's absorbing it, and it forms a very sticky surface on the bottom. So when the bees run out of honey, they go in here and they feed on it, and they feed on that bottom board, which is the picture we just saw. Now, you leave an opening in the middle of this, and we'll demonstrate that, and the bees keep going. I'm sorry, the vapor keeps going up, and it goes through the candy board, and it gets into this opening like a chimney, and then you have your wood shaving over here. So you're using it like a quilt box, and it's absorbing all that humidity. I never have problems with humidity in my hives. You know you have problems with humidity in your hives when you open the inner cover in the spring and it's black, covered with mold. And the only reason that would happen is if you just don't have enough ventilation. So winter, we're going to have this configuration: candy board, the feeder filled with wood shavings. We're going to have our inner cover with the opening facing down, so bees can come in and out. There's an opening in my candy bars. They can also use this to get in and out. So they have two entrances, which also act as chimneys for the vapor or for the humidity to escape. Then I'm going to put my insulation board, a 2-inch insulation board, and I'm going to put my telescopic cover, and then I'm going to strap everything together so that wind, raccoons, animals don't mess with it. And that's how they go through winter. The only thing I may add is I wrap mine with tar paper. I don't use insulation on the outside. I'm sure it would help them more, but doing 25 hives with my schedule, it's almost impossible. I will wrap the nukes, but not all the big colonies. If I know I have a nuke that's weak, I will do whatever I can and put insulation all the way around. So those two colonies are, they were winterized last year at Crown Point. They belong to the association, and they both came out of winter healthy. We have insulation. I think it's Bee Cozy that we have here. We have our entrance reducer on the bottom, and it's set to the smallest entrance. We have our candy board. We have our feeder that's filled with shavings. We have an insulation board between, we have the inner cover insulation board between the inner and the outer, a brick, and it's strapped down. We winterized them, I believe, in early November or maybe late October, and they made it through the winter and they were super strong. And these two colonies became 6 this year. We couldn't keep up with the season with swarming, and we didn't want them to swarm, so we kept on splitting and making new colonies, and we have 6 or 7. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roseanne. I think we have 6 colonies that are very healthy. A lot of store. We didn't pull any honey in the spring or the summer, so they have a lot of food, and they're taken care of. And I want to stop here for a second and give credit to Roseanne and Gary. Gary is a volunteer that was helping Roseanne with the apiary. I helped as much as I can. I believe Randy helped a little bit as well, but Roseanne and Kurt, her husband, spent a lot of time with these colonies, and we need help, guys. Splitting, taking care of apiary on 7-8 people is a lot easier than having it fall in the lap of 1 or 2 or 3 people. So if you have time to volunteer, and Roseanne is an encyclopedia. She knows so much about bees. I believe she's been keeping bees for 8 or 9 years. She knows a lot, and she explains a lot during her inspections. You can learn a lot by hanging around her and helping her with the inspections if you volunteer with her. So my favorite, for those of you who took the class, the beekeeping class in February, when I had a presentation, 1 hour presentation on what not to do. Everybody tells you what to do. Nobody tells you what not to do. And then you find out, oh, well, why did you do that? Well, you never told me not to do it. You told me what to do. You never told me what not to do. So I'm going to go through this quickly. Don't assume that your mite load is low. And I keep saying it like a broken record. Don't assume it because you treated twice with Formic Pro already. Test your mites. September is critical, but you still have a chance to fix bad colonies. So test your mite load and treat. Watch your temperature, follow the labels. I'm not going to tell you what to treat with, but if you do oxalic acid, you got to do it 3 weeks in a row so that all the bees that are under the cap will hatch and whatever mites on them will get exposed to oxalic acid and die. This is a mistake, believe it or not, more common than you think. People have a super full of honey and they keep the queen excluder in there, they forget it. And what happens, the bees are hungry, the cluster is moving up. Bees and workers can go through that queen excluder, the queen cannot, and the queen dies behind. So remove your queen excluders right now. You're now worried right now about the queen laying in the supers. Let the bees manage where the queen is laying. If you have too much honey, pull the super out. If you feel like you don't know if you have enough honey, pull the super out, put it in the freezer, protect it until the end of October. And if you need to add it back to the hive or share it with another hive, although it's a no-no, but we won't get into that, then you can give it back to the hive if they need it. Don't use the same miticide. Don't just stick with Formic Pro or oxalic acid because mites will develop a resistance to a single miticide over time. It's not going to happen from 1, 2, or 3 treatments, but year after year, then you treat your colonies and you don't know what's going on because nothing is dropping and you know there is a high level of infestation. Don't inspect your colony or approach them this time of the year without PPE, personal protective equipment. Hives and bees are a lot more aggressive right now. They're protecting their food. There's no more nectar flow or very little. And so they have to protect their hive. And you approach them, you've always approached them with just a veil, no gloves and shorts on. And now you open the hive and you got 10,000 bees on you. You wonder why, because all they're doing, they're protecting their colony. Don't add honeybee healthy or essential oil to your syrup. If you do it right now, you will cause major robbing. And the bigger colonies are going to kill the weaker colonies and steal their syrup. So please don't add any essential oil right now or honeybee healthy. When you do your inspection, I tell people, I mentor a lot of people, and I say, don't just inspect to inspect. I don't inspect every week because I inspect every week, and that's what my calendar says. I inspect with a purpose. What is your purpose of inspecting? Right now, are you just checking to see if they have enough honey? You know, you can determine that without going through every single frame. You can just crack the box open and lift it. You can tell 80 pounds from 20 pounds. There's a big difference. And so if it's light, you got to feed. And if it's heavy, then most likely they have enough honey. On a warm day, you may go in there and take all the capped frames and put them in the middle so that as the colony rises in the winter, they will get to it. So when you open your colonies now, especially the weak, small ones, nukes, don't keep them open more than 10 to 15 minutes. One thing I learned from Roseanne, she always has a towel with her, and she will open the box, take a box, put it on the side and cover it with a towel. And sometimes there's a towel underneath and a towel above. So bees can't escape in and out, and other bees are not going to smell the honey and attack. So have a towel with your old towel and cover your colonies. She also covers the colony, the hive that she's inspecting. She has a towel on top and she rolls it only enough to pull the frame that she needs to inspect, puts it back, rolls it some more until it gets to the other side. One thing in the winter, you're going to sit there, and especially if you're a first-year beekeeper, and you're going to wonder, did they make it? Did they make it? I don't see anything flying in and out. Oh my gosh, my bees died. So what is your instinct? You go in there and you put your ear next to the hive and you don't hear anything and you tap on it. And then you listen to see if they're buzzing. Well, it's 30 degrees outside and you just tapped on it, scared the heck out of them, broke the cluster. And now they can't cluster back fast enough. And you just caused major, major harm to your colonies, to your hive. So don't open the hive, don't tap on it. Don't inspect in the middle of the winter. And if you must treat with oxalic acid in the winter, treat when the bees are flying in and out. So that's your cue. You can open that top cover and look and see if you have enough sugar or enough food up in the feeder, or you can give them a puff of oxalic acid. But the bees need to be in and out. The cluster is already large, and when you vape, when you hit them with oxalic acid, you're going to hit a large number of bees, where if they're clustered and you do oxalic acid, you're only hitting the outer shell of the cluster. So that's it. I hope you learned something from here, from this presentation. Really keep it simple. If you follow this here, and if your mite is under control, your mite count, I guarantee you're going to have 90% chance of survival, if not 100%. 90, I read it somewhere in a journal, I don't remember which one, but they said 90% of the colonies that collapse during the winter are caused by high mite load. And so if you queen rights, people will take a hive that died, a colony that died, to Denzel, and Denzel will inspect it live under the camera. And he'll point out to the mite poop. The mite defecates in the cells, on the walls of the cells, and it's a white poop, very small, but you can distinctly see it. And all he has to do, he doesn't have to go through he'll pull up one frame, look at it and say, yep, they died from mites, look at this. And so can't emphasize enough. Open for questions. I'll look at the chats. I don't know if I missed anything, but please unmute yourself. If you have any questions, let me know.
Hey, Robert, this is Matt. Speaking of mite poop, I sent you a picture and I didn't know if that would help or not.
I don't have it on my computer, but yes, if you email it to me now, I'll grab it and share it with the group, and I can explain to them what that looks like.
All right.
Hey, Matt, let's see, Jen wrote in, hive beetles, you said put a pound of kosher salt on the ground. What was that about?
So the beetles will burrow into the ground, and I don't know the process exactly, but the larva goes down from the hive into the ground, and they burrow in there, and that's where they spend some time until they mature. And so if you have salt under the hives, so let's say you have a stand and you have 2 hives in there, just take a pound of salt, 2 pounds of salt, it's cheap, and just sprinkle it on the ground under the hives. And that kills them as they go down. The larva can't tolerate the salt and they die. Now, somebody gave me this advice and I heard it once on YouTube. I can't remember who it was, but it was a master beekeeper. And I tried it. And so the first year I had a problem with hives, and ever since I've never had an issue with mites. And that's the only thing that I've done differently. So it must work. Actually, another friend of mine who has some hives has tried it and it worked for him as well. Try it. I don't know the details. I haven't studied hive beetles yet. But I know it's coming up with my master beekeeping. We get a whole lesson on it. I don't know how they die, but all I understand is the larva touches the salt and it dies under the hive in the ground.
I'm going to try it. I like it. Somebody asks, how quick are my bees going to make honey this time of year?
From syrup or from nectar? Goldenrod came and left, and we didn't get a lot of nectar, unfortunately. This is why we feed 2:1, the ratio sugar to water. And so they have a better chance of dehydrating it. Even if they don't cap it, it's okay. It's food that's available to them. But that's more like dehydrated sugar water. It's not real natural honey. You want them to have honey, so not very fast. But if you start feeding now, I guarantee you, you'll have some nice capped frames by the end of October.
Then someone writes in, what do you think about a box with a screen bottom, drilling 1-inch holes into all 4 sides, filling them with wood shavings to reduce moisture?
Well, moisture rises. It elevates with the heat, and it's going to hit your upper part of the hive, not the bottom. I would say no, because now you're putting holes in your colony, in the bottom of your colony, where wax moth come and lay eggs, and now you have a major wax moth infestation. I would say no. The shavings should be on top, not at the bottom of the colony. Somebody mentioned Jamie Ellis from Florida. He's an expert on hive beetles. Florida has a major, he's my instructor, by the way, in the Master Beekeeping program. And we do have him booked for November. He's gonna speak for our club, to our club. He's got a beautiful presentation. Haven't announced it yet, but it's gonna be about the workers, the bee workers. So stay tuned. We're gonna have a beautiful presentation with him. And he is an expert on that. He's got a couple of presentations on the hive beetles. They are really hard to control once they spread throughout your colony. So to mitigate them, you don't give your colony more space than they can handle. When you bring your package bees, because your colony died in the winter and you have 20 frames of capped brood, don't give them 20 frames of, capped, drawn out wax frame. Don't give them all 20 frames. Give them what they need, the 10 in the bottom, and don't give them the second box until they filled 80% of the space. Healthy bees can defend themselves from hive beetles. We do them a disservice when we give the colonies a lot more space than they can defend.
All right, the last question. I have a couple of 2-month-old splits that have only filled out 10 frame deep, one 10 frame deep, and the second deep is mostly undrawn wax foundation. Should I consider moving them into a 2-story 5-framer?
I have the same situation. I'm feeding them heavily. I have actually 4 frames in one and 5 in the other. Those were virgin queens that I, after a Formic Pro treatment in August, I think, behind my house, my bees decided to supersede my colony, and they made, gosh, I can't tell you how many cells they made. And I went one day to inspect, and I'm looking, I saw capped cells, and I look and they're hatching, they're cutting and they're coming out. So I started catching them with clips and didn't know what to do. So I started taking some frames from this colony and that colony, and I formed some, I think 2 or 3 different nukes. And so I'm in that situation. I won't make the decision until later in October. whether I want to merge them or see what I can do. The key now is these colonies I am feeding pollen, and I'm giving them 1-to-1 syrup fortunately I have drawn out frames, so they don't have to draw wax out. If you don't have frames that are already drawn out, then you might be in trouble. There are ways to mitigate that. You can buy Better Bees makes some frames that with some wax foundation that's synthetic. You can buy those. They're about $5 a piece. Buy 5 of them and put 5 in each colony and feed them until they hopefully fill it with honey. If they don't, and you have a colony with a super, and that colony doesn't need a super of capped honey, take some of those frames and give them to those weaker colonies. Wrap them well, and I think they'll make it. If you can use double screens, a double screen and put 1 colony on the bottom, 1 on top, the heat from the bottom one will help the ones in the top, and you may end up with 1 surviving, or hopefully 2. But you're welcome to reach out to me because I have the same predicament, and I'm going to address it most likely at the end of October. I'll determine what I should do.
And that's all the questions. If anybody wants to unmute themselves, go to town.
I had a question. Have you ever tried to spray sugar water into the empty cells and then feed the bees that way?
Somebody told me that a quicker way, if you have a situation where the bees don't have enough time to go collect nectar or sugar and bring it in, somebody said to take a frame and pour, put it over a tub, obviously, but pour sugar syrup in there, 2-to-1, and fill up the cells, and then stand it up and let it drip overnight. Obviously, you're not doing this outside, you're doing it in an enclosed room. And then when all the sugar drip, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of cells that are filled with syrup. And then you take that slowly and insert it into a colony that needs it. I have not tried it, but theoretically, it's a great idea. You're getting the honey or the sugar where it needs to be.
I have a question.
Sure.
Will that next meeting be videoed, or is that like a meeting that you have at a place? It won't be Zoom?
We might be able to do Zoom from a cell phone, where we can stream it from a cell phone.
Oh, okay.
We'll try our best. Depending on how many people show up, it might be chaotic because they'll all be hovering over the hive. So we'll try our best, and we'll try to stream it via Zoom. But as of now, no, it's only in person. And by the way, we're giving away a gift door prize, and that's one of those bee cozies. So you can wrap your hive for the winter. They're about $50.
I meant the meeting in November. I'm sorry.
Oh, in November, it would be via Zoom.
Okay.
I haven't asked Jamie or Dr. Alice whether he's going to allow us to record it or not. Any meetings that we record, we end up putting them on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
And to find it, go to YouTube and search for Summit County Beekeepers Association and join it. And then every time we add a video to it, you get notified. Like this meeting is being recorded, and most likely we're going to put it on the YouTube channel.
This was excellent.
Thank you.
Very good.
Putting this, I've also control ants.
So with ants, I haven't had this issue, but I hear of people sprinkling cinnamon between the inner cover and the outer cover and around the colony. And I hear that cinnamon acts as a repellent. Actually, I'm gonna call on Matt because he has a method that he uses. He's got his hives on some kind of legs, and then the legs are sitting in a can of oil. And so no ants can scroll in there. Matt, are you still with us? Matt Diepenbrock?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, there's a number of ways to do that. The first time I did it, I had one of those metal stands that I put my hives on, but I put the legs of those inside, I think they were soup cans or shallow pineapple cans, and I poured oil in them. What I found was that I didn't put a cover over the top of the can, so water that would get in there would displace the oil, right? Because oil floats on top. So then what I did was, if you cover the top and keep the water out of it as much as you can, it worked a lot better. I also found some plastic type of product with with a cover over it as well. They're much shallower than what I was using, and those were from California somewhere, but I bought like, I don't know, 4 dozen of them or something like that I put under all my hives, and it's worked pretty well. Doesn't mean you completely keep ants out, but it keeps most of them out. I think sometimes the ants will fall off the top of the trees and get on your hives and stuff and get in. So, but it's pretty effective.
Thank you, Matt.
I might have a picture I could send you as well. I just killed you with a bunch of pictures, Robert. So use them
Okay,
if
let
you
me
want.
see if I can grab them here. All right, so if you guys have any questions, I'm just going through some pictures here to see if I can find the one picture I want to show you. They're coming in as I'm not able to save the picture. So let me see how I can deal with this.
Then I just sent you a picture of the ant traps too. Like if you zoom in, you can see them under the hives from broad view.
Okay. There are a couple of pictures I'm saving, and I'll show everybody how they work. While I'm working on this, guys, we need nomination for officers. As Randy mentioned, we're going to have a survey monkey most likely and send it to everybody. It's an email that you get that says, hey, I nominate XYZ for this position. And then that person would have to accept it. And when they accept it, the next email will say, okay, for the president position, we had 4 people. And then you get to vote for one of them. Okay, I see the ant trap. That's a good one to show. 1 second, guys, I'm almost done.
I think I have like 2,500 bee pictures, Robert. So
I know I don't take a lot of pictures. I'm usually in and out. So thank you for those. I should have called you earlier for pictures. My presentation was all text until this afternoon. So I'm gonna find those pictures. And okay, so those are the candy boards. I don't know how many of you use candy boards, but this is sugar. There's a formula that we follow, and those openings here are kept so bees can go in and out, and humidity and condensation can escape through it and go to that quilt box on top. So I see this is a 10 frame and this is a 5 frame. So if you have nukes, 8 frame, 5 frames, or hives that are 8 or 10, those are great insurance policy. Cost you 16 pounds of sugar, probably about $8, and could save your bees. This is a nuke. This is a perfect example of winterizing a nuke. So he's got his entrance reducer here and a mouse guard. Bees can come in and out. You got a 5 frame nuke, another 5 frame deep nuke. He's got his candy board and the quilt box. So this is different than the feeder that I use. This has ventilation, vent holes in here, and the the steam, or I keep saying steam, but the humidity rises with the heat and it escapes through this. The entrance is reduced, so you don't have a blast of air going into the hive. And I believe both of these made it through the winter, Matt, didn't they?
Yeah, all of them did. And on the nukes, I put 2-inch board insulation, and I also wrapped all the hives in black tar paper, which you can see there.
Yeah. So if you see here, those are the nukes. They're wrapped with tar paper, and then on top of the tar paper, he put the 2-inch foam insulation.
And
So
you
I
can
didn't
see why
it.
we have a top entrance on all the hives too, because when the snow builds up, they can't get out at the bottom.
And this is for the ant legs. Those are the legs that Matt was talking about. I don't know if you can see them, but they're right here. And so you
So
put
the oil. Yep, the
Yeah,
oil
go
goes
on.
in the bottom part, and then there's like a top, I'll call it a plate, but it sits over there to keep the water out so the oil stays in.
And he has a robbing screen right here. Any other questions? If you guys have any questions or think of something later on, send an email to officers@summitbeekeepers.com, and one of us will respond. Either Roseanne, Randy, or myself.
Hey, Robert, I have a question regarding like
Yeah.
your picture here and like process. So we put the honey in the middle and at the top and stuff, but as the bees eat it in the wintertime, we get I don't know, let's say it's a 50-degree day in January, let's say, or February. Do we go in and check real quick and maybe take those middle frames out of the middle and put them to the outside and bring the outside ones in so they have more honey right there in the middle, kind of do a reset in a way?
Absolutely not. The only time you want to go to that level of frame inspection would be after April, after mid-April. January, February, March, it's cold. They may not be clustered, but you don't want to disturb them. When the cluster breaks and they fed on these frames in the middle, when they cluster again, they're going to cluster over the frames that are capped. So, but if we have a streak of 2-3 weeks where it's 10 degrees and they can only go up, that's when bees starve and there's a ton of honey on both sides. Let them do their thing. Once you winterize them, wrap them, don't touch them. The only thing you want to do on a warm day is maybe get the quilt box out, look at the candy board. Do they need more sugar? If they do, give them more sugar, and that's it.
All right, thanks.
For the first year beekeepers, this has been one heck of a year. I can say that. Major swarming, no nectar flow, abundance of nectar flow in the spring, which caused a lot of swarming, and you guys couldn't keep up with it. And then in August, end of August and September, unfortunately, we didn't have the nectar flow that we were expecting. And that's why it's critical for the seasoned guys to always jump in and mentor somebody. I can't tell you how much it helped me get into bees. Like I said, I thought you put a bunch of bees in a box and you go once a year and collect the honey. That's not the case, obviously. So it's good to have a mentor, somebody that lives in the area that you can call, and he can take 5-10 minutes, swing by your house and check your colonies. I know a lot of you expect the officers to do it. We have 200, we have a record high membership, by the way. We're at 224 members this year. And to be able to answer every question from all these members and mentor and be able to visit, it's almost impossible. And that's why Randy created the mentorship program. So you don't have to be super seasoned. If you have 2 years under your belt, you're better than the guy that has no years. And if somebody has 5 years under their belt, they're better than you if you have 2 years. The other day, and I want to thank Matt for doing this, a gentleman called me. He said, I just had an operation. I need to inspect my 2 colonies. I can't do it. Can you help me? Well, I have a lot on my plate. So I reached out to Matt. Said, Matt, this guy lives a few miles away from you. Do you mind helping him? So Matt took time. He went there and helped him out. And it doesn't take much to extend a hand, and what goes around comes around. When you need help, somebody jumps in and help you. So with that, if you guys don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. I'll stick around for a few minutes, actually, in case somebody comes up with something.
Hey, thank you again. Great presentation.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.